Well, today I wanted to bring a message that I'll be drawing from Luke chapter 15, verses 1 through 24. And actually, the entire chapter of Luke is it's a very unique chapter. It's three parables that Yeshua tells, and the common theme is that it's about somebody who lost something valuable, but then reclaimed it again or got it back. And that's what the theme that I'll be speaking on today is about, and I'll be focusing pretty much on the verses that deal with the prodigal son, the return of the prodigal. And when I think of the parables of Yeshua, I always find it fascinating that it's a unique way of teaching somebody. When Yeshua taught in a parable or told a story, it was basically a word picture he was painting. It's almost as if God desires to show more of himself to us. And I think in this world, when it comes to faith or belief in God, I think there's basically three different kinds of people. I think there's people who don't believe in him, and they believe something, maybe not in God. I think everybody has this almost instinctive desire to want something higher than themselves, something more meaningful. And for some reason, they choose to believe something else, but they don't believe in God. The second group of people, I think, are people who believe in God, but relegate him to some distant afterlife figure that we'll see when we get to heaven. Not very relevant for today, unless something goes wrong, and then you pray and you hope he's there. And in the meantime, we just try to do the best we can, and we'll see him when we get there. And I think there is the third group of people that have bowed the knee to him and started a relationship with him and have fallen in love with him to the point where they just want to see more and more of him, and they want to learn something of him every day. And when Yeshua taught in parables, each one showed a different side of his nature. And at one point, I think in Mark chapter 4, when the disciples asked him, "Why do you speak in parables? Why are you teaching us through these stories?" And he kind of alluded to the fact, well, it's given to those who have eyes to see. Some may see and not understand, and those who see and do understand. And I don't think that he's bestowing any privilege, like some people have a gift of understanding more than others. I think he is appealing to that thing in us, thing in our hearts that we're supposed to have to desire more of him. And each time he told a story, each time he told a parable, he was showing another side of himself. He was showing something else and fulfilling that desire in us, but at the same time fulfilling his desire, because when you love someone as much as he loves us, as much as he loves Israel, he wants to show more of himself too. He wants to show another side of himself. He wants to show that there's more and more to learn and to go deeper with him all the time. He said, knock and the door will be open, ask and it'll be answered. I believe he was alluding to some of these things. It's almost as if the parables is a word picture that he's showing us of himself, almost like a picture from his personal scrapbook. I think they line up perfectly with what the law and the prophets teach about him, and there's always some deeper meaning behind it. But it's almost as if the law and the prophets were this beautifully written description of him, and then the parables and the life of Yeshua was this intimate touch point, this picture of him as well. One of my most treasured possessions is this letter I have that was written by my dad to his father from Paris toward the end of World War II. And in the letter, it's just a short letter. It's on the back of a postcard. It has a picture of the Cathedral of Notre Dame. And he's telling his father in a very formal way that he likes Paris very much. He hopes to get back and buy a clarinet before he comes home. And the language is typical of my dad, very respectful toward his father, very formal, which I thought maybe was interesting for a guy who grew up on the streets. But it tells me a lot about him. But that's all it would tell me. I knew my father personally. I actually saw him play that clarinet that he bought in Paris. So it was actually even a greater picture, more accurate picture of who he was and his nature and what he did. So when I see that letter and I see him personally, it lines up perfectly, and it's very fulfilling. And I think the parables do this. And when Yeshua told a parable, when he was talking to people, it was also a way that made himself and God relatable, because he always spoke in terms of everyday things that we were familiar with, things that we understood, in things that we knew about: a man working in his field, a woman sweeping her house, somebody who lost a coin and found something, somebody who's under authority, somebody who needed judgment from somebody. And that's all very relatable. They're all very familiar things, and it tells me that God's story is intertwined with our story as well, and that he's familiar, that when Yeshua came, he was familiar with those things. And he becomes very relatable when he speaks to us, when he gives us lessons from his kingdom based on things we know. I think it's a very kind thing for him to do, because it tells me that he is aware of my everyday goings and comings. He's aware of everyday life. And there's almost a Shema aspect to it. Every week we recite the Shema and talk about him when you walk on the road, when you lie down, when you rise up. And this is almost a call to live the Shema, to do that. So when he talks about a man who went out to sow in his field, I've never been a farmer, but I can relate to a day's work. Or somebody who went to a judge and needed some sort of something from somebody of authority. I can relate to that. Or somebody who lost something and found something. And every sadness I've had, every joy in my head, he talks about in these parables and tells me that he is so sensitive and aware to our needs and what we do and our going out and coming in. The parable of the prodigal, which I'll get to in a minute, in Luke 15, may be the most beautiful parable of them all. It's actually, to me in a nutshell, the most comprehensive story of salvation. It lines up with everything that Scripture teaches. If you were to ask me what passage in the Bible can teach you most about Yeshua and salvation, I might point to this one. And you'd get a full picture of what salvation is supposed to look like, which means I really don't need to preach the rest of the message, but I'll continue on. And in this parable in particular, it shows that side of God that we all love and all understand and believe in, but sometimes it's hard to accept that this Father would be coming out on the road after us to love us this much and to do that. So I'm going to read through Luke 15, verses 11 through 24, if you care to join me reading at home. Yeshua continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he said to himself, 'The servant in my father's house,'" I'm sorry, I misread that. "So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired men have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired men.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran and threw his arms around him and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate, for this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate." Now, I've heard a lot of interpretations about this, some very good ones, a lot of teachings on this. It's a very common and popular passage in Scripture, and there's a few I like. One of the ones I heard, and I've heard it here, and I agree with it, is that who the people represent in the story. Obviously, the father, I believe, represents God himself, but the son, there's different points of view on who he represents. And I heard somebody teach here that the son may be representative of Israel, God's chosen people, God's firstborn, the apple of his eye, who will still be coming back, and there'll be great rejoicing in that day, and that promise is still in place. That's a good one. I don't disagree with that. Another one I heard is that the son represents each individual person who pulled away from God or before we came to the Lord had that same experience of living in this world and then being welcomed back into the Father's kingdom. I like both of them. I think they're not contrary to each other. If you were to ask me, is the one about the Son being Israel or the Son being an individual person more accurate, I'd say yes, they both are. So I kind of agree with both of them as well. And I think it really shows us that side of God, and it really shows us that model of the kingdom. But the story is basically about 3 journeys on one road, maybe 4, it depends. We'll find out at the end. There's the Son's journey out into the world. There's the Son's journey back. And to me, the real heart of the story, the thing that gives me the most hope, is the Father's journey out to greet his Son, because it says, well, he was yet a great distance off. His Father saw him and went out to greet him and had compassion on him and threw his arms around him and kissed him. Some translations say he couldn't stop kissing him, and I really like that. But what that tells me is the high point of the story, the whole purpose of the story, it took place on the road, not back on the Father's estate. It didn't wait till the Son get back. Like God doesn't wait till we get to heaven so we feel the fullness of our salvation. I love the fact that the Father saw him, took off, and went after him, so we have this imagery of Messiah, this imagery of God coming down from his throne in heaven, coming into this world to do that for us, to see us a distance off. It's important to note that it happened not where the Son was, his first destination, and not back on his Father's estate. This happened out in the world, out on the road. And to me, some of the greatest things, and maybe all our testimonies could bear this out, the greatest things God ever did for us happens outside. It happens outside a place of worship. It happens in the world where we were found. It happens in the world where we were lost, maybe struggling, maybe hurting about things. It's where it happens. God does his greatest work out there in this world. And that's where we're supposed to find him. And I think the parables bear that out. God is showing himself in the everyday. And I believe if you look for God in everything you do, he will show up in everything you do. I believe if your heart is always longing for him, he won't leave you hungry. He'll always come and get you, and he'll always show you another side of himself. I think the Son's journey is somewhat ecclesiastical. But make no mistake that this parable is not a story about moral choices. The Son wasn't making a moral choice. He wasn't choosing worldly things over his Father's things. There's a lot of gray areas in this world, but when it comes to relationship with God, there is no gray area. We can make it a gray area. Sometimes it makes us easier to get along, or it makes things more palatable. But the Son, make no mistake, this was about relationship. It was about the relationship, the covenant relationship he had with his Father, and the relationship that he forfeited, that he willingly gave away. So this was not a moral choice. The Son wasn't choosing worldly things over his Father's things. Remember, he got his share of the inheritance. He got his share of his Father's estate. So he had all his Father's blessings and everything. He had everything he wanted. So he wasn't choosing the things of this world over his Father's things. He was choosing the things of this world over his Father. So make no mistake, this story is about relationship. It's about covenant relationship between God and his people, between God and us as well. One of my favorite passages in Scripture is Psalm 104. And I love it because it talks about this beauty of creation. It talks about these amazing things that God made, every aspect of life, right down to the heavens, the mountains, the seas, the animal kingdom. And you're in awe of reading it, that God could do all this, that God could speak this into being by just a word, and that he gave this all to us to enjoy. I love the part when he talks about creating the seas where the ships go to and fro. And my favorite verse is where Leviathan goes to frolic. I don't know what frolicking is, but I know it's not purposeful. It's just an enjoyment that God watches. We have these blessings. But in that same psalm, in Psalm 104, it talks about how even the animals are dismayed when God's face is turned away, that they eat from his hand, and when he pulls it away, then their spirit leaves them. So it's how dependent they are on him, and how necessary he is. So it's not just the blessings of creations. It's not just the things God gives us. It's not just God's blessing that's supposed to carry us. Those are fleeting. They come and they go. Sometimes they're over. It seems like they're over before they begin. But the important thing is who gave them. And once we start looking at the blessing as being greater than the one who blessed, we start to break that covenant relationship with God. Once we start looking at creation as being equal or as great as the Creator, we start breaking that covenant relationship with Him. We can enjoy God's blessings. And I think people of faith can do that all the time. The things of God can sometimes overwhelm and get in the way of God. Not that we're not supposed to do certain things or be a certain way. But at the end of the day, before you close your eyes, the success of your day depended on how close you were with the Lord that day. Not so much what you did for Him. Does your heart beat faster? Does it pound the way His does? When He watches you sleep, His heart must be pounding with joy. Does ours do the same thing? So this really isn't about relationship. The son made a choice. He had the things of his father, wanted the things of the world, he wanted it all. And he chose something else. He chose a different kingdom than his father's kingdom. History of the Bible is basically a history of people choosing between kingdoms, between choosing God's kingdom, between choosing the things of God and the things of this world. It all started in the garden. I mean, Eve was deceived into thinking she could have what God created, but really didn't need God completely to enjoy them. I think when Israel left Egypt and they were in the wilderness, they saw the hand of God move. He was present with them. God was present in the garden with Adam and Eve. He was present in the wilderness with Israel. And some said, well, we want to go back to Egypt. We're not having as much fun out here as we thought. And I think it's happened throughout history. I think one of the most heartbreaking things for the Lord was when the people went to Samuel and said, we want a king like the rest of the world has. We want a king like the nations have. These are people who saw God move, who believed in God, who heard the word of God, and still wanted a king. And the Lord didn't really punish them except by saying, okay, you got it. You'll have to live with it, though. You'll have to live with his choices. You'll have to live with the things that happened. Imagine being the Lord and hearing who you love the most wants another king. We believe in you, God, but we want something else. How heartbreaking. And maybe one of the more heartbreaking instances of all is in the Gospels when Pilate mockingly stood Yeshua before the religious leaders and said, behold your king. And the response is, we have no king but Caesar. Now, I know they really didn't believe that in their heart, but to say it, what a heartbreak for the Lord. So this is a history of choosing two kingdoms, and it's chosen by people who knew of God, who believed in God, who had a relationship with God, and where God moved in their lives. So this son was kind of doing the same thing. He didn't stop believing that his father existed. He didn't stop believing that his father was alive and well. He just wanted his father's things without his father. He made that choice of taking his father's things and going out into the world, facing the empty charms of this world, which came upon him very quickly, becoming a servant to this world. Because when you make choices and you're out of choices and they go bad, then things start to choose you, like becoming the world's servant. So the son decided to go back. And I loved his attitude going back. Where do you go when you've lost everything? Where do you go when everything you wanted comes into being and it fails you? Where do you go with everybody you've run into who you hope would be your joy and your happiness fails you? That's the nature of this kingdom. That's the nature of this world that this son chose. He had everything he wanted, and it went by quickly. And when that happens, he had no covering. He had no choice left. He was a son when he left. Now when he's out in the world, he wasn't a son anymore. He wasn't his father's son anymore. He ran out of choices. And when you have no choices, things can choose you. He went back forfeiting his identity. He said, well, you know what? I'll go back and I'll tell my father, I've sinned against you, not worthy to be your son. I'll be anything you want me to be. I know I've lost the sonship, but I just want to be taken care of and covered by you. So now it was the father's turn to choose. It could have been a tragic end. The father now had the choice of what he was going to do. He had the choice when the son left of doing what was maybe proper or maybe traditional in his day. I mean, he took his inheritance, which means, according to the son, the father was dead. The father could have ripped his garment and said, all right, now he's dead to me. He will never come back. My son is dead to me. That's the end of it. People in that culture at that time would have said that. They would have encouraged the father to maybe even do that. But now the father had the choice. He saw the son off. He had the choice between slapping him and kissing him. And what did he do? He did the most appropriate thing. He really didn't exercise a choice at all because he never wavered. The son's the one who wavered. The son's the one whose heart changed and mind changed. The father's heart never changed. And he did the only thing he could do. He ran, he threw his arms around him, and he couldn't stop kissing him. In fact, who knows, the son may have started his little spiel about, I've sinned against you, and the father said, I don't want to hear it, just come here, just let me hold you, just let me hug you, let me pull you in. When the son left, he gave up his sonship, and he came back, again, as anything his father wanted him to be. He left it up to his father. And as I mentioned, the tragedy of the story is if the father said, well, you're not my son anymore. You left, live with it. But he didn't. He made him a son again. Because the real calling in our faith, the real calling in our belief in God is not for us to create our own identity, it's for us to receive it. And sometimes it's the hardest thing. The other thing the son did, which is ironic, he left as if his father was dead, but the son came back as if he were dead. He died, the father was alive, and the father said, no, you're not my servant anymore, you're my son. Bring the robe, bring the ring. Very significant, putting a robe around somebody. Very significant, putting a ring on his finger. Very significant, kissing him on the neck with a holy kiss. It tells you who he is. The father didn't do that to the servants. He didn't do that to the hired men. He did this to the son. No questions asked. I'm coming back. The tragedy of this account would have been if the father followed traditional culture and said, you know what? You're dead to me. It would have been if the father forgot. The son may have forgot, but the father never forgot. A few weeks ago, a month or so ago, I was at Delaware Park, and every Saturday morning when I've been there, there's been this young woman running around carrying this huge flag. I don't know what the flag says because it's usually waving in the wind. She's going fast. She's a real runner. She's not like me. She just runs around, and she's so happy. She says good morning to everybody she passes. She always comes in the opposite direction of me. And a few weeks ago, two women stopped her and asked her what the flag was about and what she was doing. And I stopped to listen, and she said, I belong to an organization called Honor and Remember. And what we do is we run from state to state carrying this flag, and we remember soldiers that were killed in Afghanistan, in Iraq. And she said the real tragedy when a soldier is killed is that he's killed twice. First time on the battlefield, and the second time when nobody remembers him. So this is our calling, she said, and this is what we do to keep their names alive. And by the way, it's Honor and Remember. You can keep them in prayer because she said they won't have any police escort this time because of COVID-19. But that could have happened here if the father forgot. We're all called to die once in this world. The tragedy is we're called, if we're not following the Lord, to die a second time. We could all die a second time if we forfeit the covering of our father. The son didn't do that. The son only died once because of the father's unchanging mind and unchanging heart. All of chapter 14 is about a treasure. It's about a treasure being lost and found. It's a song by a band called the Traveling Wilburys. It's called Handle Me With Care. And one of the lines of the song is, you're the best thing that I've ever found. Handle me with care. And we could all say that about the Lord. I'm sure it's all part of our testimony. But flip that around and look at the Lord's view of us. The Lord could be saying that about us. You're the best thing that he's ever found. And this story, this proves it. The Father is viewing the Son as that, as the lost treasures, the thing most valuable to him that he pulled back. And when he comes out to greet you, it bears that out. I think the fourth journey on this road is what I call the parade route back, the Son coming back, or us coming back. Put yourself in that position. And everybody on the side of the road saying, how could the Father hug him? How could the Father love him still? What did he do that he gained such favor with the Father? Your answer could be nothing. It could be you were lost, and now you're just desperate and you want to come home. And the The father didn't ask the son why he came back. He said, what's your motive for coming back? He didn't say that. Because you have a need, because you're hungry, now you're coming back. He just said, I've been waiting and waiting on that roof, and I knew you'd come back, and I saw it. And when the father was running out, the neighbors would have said, where is he going? When the son was coming back, the neighbors would have said, what's he doing? It's a parade route. And you're in that parade. Isn't it amazing that God told a parable with you as the subject, with every one of us as the subject of that parable? God made a movie, and you're the star of it. And that's how he looks at us. So in closing, I just wanted to say that in this time of turmoil in our country and this COVID-19 and race riots and policemen going haywire and injustice, the one thing that hasn't changed with all the new normals, and I'm not real fond of that term, with all the restrictions we're on, with curfews and distancing and all that, all for the good of us, I know that. But I'm glad God's not social distancing from us. I'm glad God is still running on that road. And I'm glad that when I first bowed the knee, that he saw me coming far off. And he didn't let me toil in this world till I got to heaven. He came out and got me. He came out and got all of you. If you're in a place right now where there's hurt in your life, whatever the reason, and you need him to come and get you, he's tired of waiting. He'll come. He can't sit in that chair on that roof looking down the road anymore. He just can't resist coming out after you. So if you're in that place, you start to repent, you start to tell him how sorry you are, all he wants to do is start kissing you uncontrollably and holding you and bringing you home.